Can you hear me? All right. Since everyone can hear me, I'm so glad to be on this call, and I can see so many people, others from Nigeria, others from Botswana, Uganda, and all over Africa. I'm so glad to be on this call. So today, basically, I'll be talking about some basics about policy analysis. Because in the climate space, we engage with so many policies, and these policies are so wide. So I'd like us to get a little insight on how the policy analysis process is, how it can be, and which role we play, and where do we lie. And I'm going to be sharing my screen. The presentation will be quite short, but later I'd like different volunteers to also take us through policy analysis using any other example. Because I try to make this as simple as possible so that it's easy to be understood by everyone, and it can be a basis for further research by any other person. So I'll be sharing my screen. All right, so you're welcome. This is the screen I'm sharing. We're going to go through simple basics of policy analysis, how the policy cycle is, how do these policies come into place. And I'll be using common examples that we have in our communities to help us understand the concept of policy analysis. Then later, the basic concept which are combined with adaptation finance and how it has been over the years. So the basic policy analysis goes through 5 stages. The first one is the goal or the agenda. This is basically like what you would like to achieve. So what you'd like to achieve, like in an area or in a country. Then there is policy formulation, policy adoption, policy implementation, and policy analysis. So basically, I'm going to use an example. For example, here in policy formulation here, I gave 2 scenarios, but the goal we want to achieve is how to avail basic needs for my city. This is an example that we can use. For instance, in your country, how would you like to achieve basic needs for youths in your country or in your city? That's like the goal or the agenda you would like to achieve. Then after setting that clear agenda, the next thing is policy formulation. So to achieve this agenda, one person may say, I would like to have free education for all. Because in this policy formulation, every suggestion is correct. But in the next stages, there's a stage of adoption, presenting. So if it's accepted, it becomes a policy. So if, for instance, to achieve basic needs for each and everyone in your city, you decide you'll be providing free education for each and everyone in that, for all the youths in that city. And that's the plan you want to do. After it is set up, the next stage is policy adoption. Policy adoption involves convincing stakeholders that whatever you're suggesting is a feasible option. I'm giving an example of this because I hope it may
Joshua, a
relate to
minute.
so many people.
Wait a minute, Joshua.
Yeah.
I'm seeing messages in the chat. They're saying they can't hear you clearly. I don't know why. Can everyone hear me? Okay, Joshua, speak so that we see if they can hear you now.
Can everyone hear me? Okay.
Can everyone hear Joshua? Joshua, speak, we see.
And Isaac, can you hear me or any other person?
I can hear you, but I don't know about the rest. Yeah, they can hear you. You can go on, Josh. Yeah.
Okay, so should I start over or I should just proceed? Okay, let me start over. So we shall go through a basic policy process, the agenda or the goal, policy formulation, policy adoption, then policy implementation, then policy assessment. So for the agenda or goal, I'll use an example of we'd like to avail basic needs for people in our cities, whatever city you are in. The next stage is policy formulation. So if you come up with a goal, anyone can bring up a policy, like a suggestion for policy, but at that stage, it's not yet a policy. For instance, one leader can say, we shall have free education for all. Another leader can suggest, I suggest let us have bank robberies to support our youth in our country. So we shall start with free education for all. If one leader said we shall have free education for all, the next stage is they must convince the stakeholders. In the context of climate change, you see, COP is a conference of parties. There are so many parties involved in climate change. There are so many nations. Meaning, whatever policy you bring up, you have to convince the stakeholders to take it on. And that's in the stage of policy adoption. So at this stage, whoever brought out the policy of free education, you must convince their people in their community, their leaders, that this is a very feasible policy, and it will help us achieve the goal of availing basic needs to my city. The next stage will be policy implementation. If the policy is accepted by the stakeholders, the next step is whatever is in the policy is implemented according to the policy. After that, we go to policy assessment to assess, did the policy achieve what it had to do, and if it didn't, how can we improve upon it? The other example will be if one leader said, let me say, is very passionate about youth and may not know all other workings of different systems. I'd say, let us give youth money from empty banks and give youth money every month. Even this leader is right. However, he has to convince the stakeholders that this policy is good and will be working in this way, and that's the stage of policy adoption. After that stage, you go to policy implementation, then policy assessment. So I try to make it as brief as possible, but you know, the climate policy is so wide, and I'll talking about just very few concepts. So at this point, I'll call on some volunteers who have understood these 5 steps to try to explain them in their own examples. So Isaac, I think maybe people will raise up their hand or send you a message that someone else can explain these 5 steps in their own examples. Thank you.
Yes, I've seen a couple of reactions. Sato, okay. So that means, Joshua, we have opened the conversation to the rest of the participants, right? Okay. Right. Yes, Tato.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe. Hi, everybody. I'm Tato Kabaisi from Botswana. I'm a climate youth and activist. I'm traveling, so I can't switch on my video. I wanted to share on the policy process. Thank you for sharing that in detail. I think the same applies also in different kinds of settings and mechanisms that we see in policy analysis and policy adoptions in our respective countries. First is the objective, and then this objective, from my understanding, it has to stem out with trying to solve a problem. And this problem has to go through different kinds of processes for that, so that we can be able to refine the solution in such a way that we understand how we can solve it. These are the pros and cons of that solution that has been come up with. That is how you come up with the policy formulation, and throughout this process, objective. Pardon?
Tato, you can go on.
Okay, thank you. There's consultative processes. This is why it's important for us youth and different kinds of groups from civil society to be present and to be aware of these kind of policy formulations, because we understand that a majority of our leaders always want to cut corners. So having this understanding of the policy process, the objective, we also need to understand how that objective came up and why that objective is a priority out of all the mission or the vision. If it's an organization, the mission and vision of an organization. If it's a country, we have these Vision 2036 going on. So that problem or objective has to come up from there. Then the solution is the policy formulation. That's what guides it. And through those consultations, that's how the policy is formulated or is drafted before it can be adopted. From my understanding of UNFCCC processes, that's why we have different conferences and sessions going on throughout the year so that we can refine policies that have been implemented. Some of them are not working for us anymore. Some of them were not, these were decisions that were made and were not inclusive of minority groups, of marginalized groups, of frontline people. So this is an ongoing process, this policy development process. It's an ongoing process. And at any time, it's okay and for you to raise a question on the process and want feedback and demand answers from our world leaders. So I just wanted to add on that, and also an encouragement to not feel like the policy process is such a huge or daunting task that we cannot even be able to dissect. So thank you very much for the presentation, Joe. That's all from me.
All right, Isaac, is there any other question before I continue?
I think, Joshua, you can continue. You can continue.
Oh, okay, thank you very much. The next, we shall look at this in the case of adaptation finance. As we look at the policy cycle, the first thing is the agenda or the goal. Then adaptation finance is like we'd like to get adaptation finance to support developing countries in the risks they're facing of climate change. Just a minute, yeah. But we commonly fall in two places: formulation, adoption. However, some of our fellow advocates have got access to like negotiation rooms. So you'll see throughout the cycle, few of the advocates are participating in the stage of setting up the goal. Most of them participate in the stage of when they're presenting it to stakeholders and giving feedback and demanding for something better. So as we are talking here, everyone will be seeing which stage are you participating actively in, and which stage directly relates to your NGO and how you can work better. So adaptation finance goes through three major eras. First of all is the early years under the UNFCCC, that is 1998-2008. And we moved to the Copenhagen shift in 2009-2015. Then we moved to the post-Paris era in 2016-2018. I think most of us are very conversant to the post-Paris era because the things like the Paris Agreement are very familiar to us. But these climate change discussions began way earlier. And I couldn't go beyond the post-Paris era because the content was too much. And I decided to make it simple and palatable for all of us. So throughout these eras, from the first era to the third era, you'll be seeing many concepts changing. Like in the first era, they can bring up a concept, but in the next era, they find that maybe the concept of mitigation wasn't clearly defined, or the concept of phasing down wasn't clearly defined, or the concept of vulnerable countries wasn't clearly defined, then the cycle starts again. So, for instance, if they begin and they reach at policy assessment and they realize in different countries, we did not clearly determine which are the developing countries and which are the developed countries, meaning they have to do the assessment, they'll do the assessment and start again with better goals, which clearly explain whatever the earlier policy missed out. Hope we are together there. So as I'm discussing, I'll be bringing out some few concepts which came up and some few concepts which needed some improvement over time and where we are up to date. But I won't exhaust everything, but it's just to paint a fair picture. So the major question at the start is how much finance should be provided to support climate adaptation, and who should provide it, and how should it be allocated? At the start, they decided that indeed there's need for adaptation finance, and it was accepted. However, in the next period of time, they realized that clearly state in the policy who will provide the finance and who is receiving the finance. So such things always come up. I'll give an example. In COP26, they concluded by saying a phase down of fossil fuels. And after that, demands came up, but that people are demanding for a phase out. When you write it as a phase down, the policy is not clear to not achieve the desired goal. So I'm going to go through some of the things which have been coming up and how that have been improved. So this will just help you to sharpen your ears that when you're hearing the policy of COP28, you'll be keen to see which phrases are they using around fossil fuels, which phrases are they using around providing the finance so that you can know whether they're addressing the problem or they're not addressing the problem. So at first the concept of justice wasn't so clear because there are different forms of justice. There's distributive, procedural recognition, compensatory, among others, as you can read in the presentation here. Because if you and people say it's declaring that justice will be delivered to people, and it's not clearly defining what justice is, it means it's also not addressing the problem. In the presentation, in my presentation, I think I'll talk about mostly the concept of distributive justice, which refers to a situation where all primary social goods are distributed equally to everyone. But in our case of climate change, we see that different countries are different levels of development. So if they're given equally to everyone, the justice will not be achieved. And this brings in a concept of unequal distribution, where other countries are considered to be more advantageous than others, meaning the share Africa should get should not be the share as Germany should get because of our different levels of development. Yeah, but still, I'm still in the first era. But still, avoiding this issue, among the things which they concluded with, organizations like CAN kept on demanding, saying that avoiding these issues of justice would ultimately condemn poor nations, sacrificing their vital interests. Because mostly realize that these developing countries in Africa are basically demanding for a livelihood, whereas the developed countries are demanding to keep their lifestyle, not really a livelihood. That's why we would say that avoiding this issue of justice will not deliver the goal which was in the climate policy. Yeah. Then okay, during this first decade and on the first decade, the concept of justice was not explicitly defined by the UNFCCC. Here, I just based on the concept of justice as we're using it in the policy analysis. Because this concept can also go through the entire process of policy analysis. If you're finding it clearly, and as you're doing your climate advocacy, you'll be hearing so many words like climate justice, pay up for the loss and damage, climate debt, the polluter must pay. All these are policies which directly relate to the climate finance. So and sometimes they're not clearly explained, which means they're not deliver their achieved objectives. Yeah, so the next, I'll talk about briefly the UNFCCC provisions on adaptation finance. In this year stated here, the UNFCCC mostly focused on mitigation. The concept of mitigation and adaptation, I think I explained it earlier we explained it earlier in the earlier lecture. But in this year, the UNFCCC majorly focused on mitigation, leaving out adaptation. Yet the developing countries mostly need adaptation finance. And we found that at least if it's not, we wanted it to be the major thing, but if it's not, let them at least have an equal footing. But the questions came up, who should get this adaptation finance? Because still the definition of developing countries wasn't yet defined clearly in the previous era. So now we go to the Kyoto Protocol. I know I've not gone through so many concepts because I want to fit into something which we can understand. And in the Kyoto Protocol, we came up with the questions like who should get this finance? Indeed, countries came up together and said it's true. We have had a contribution on this climate crisis, and we can pay the climate. We will have to pay this climate finance, even if it wasn't legally binding. But countries that agreed to pay. And questions came up: who should get this climate finance? And in terms of distributive justice, how should we distribute this burden across all different nations? And who should pay and who should benefit? And I'll read for you something simple here, which was in the post-Kyoto era, which says like in terms of distributive justice, there were numerous provisions on burden sharing among industrialized countries, meaning that the provision of how we expect Germany to pay, how USA should pay, how China to pay, even if they were not legally binding, but there was a way they would be distributed to meet the cost of adaptation in particularly developed vulnerable countries. You get that concept of vulnerable countries. Moreover, it implies a commitment to distributive justice. Distributive justice is the justice to distribute resources to whom need them most as how they achieve their desired goals. But however, the term of vulnerable wasn't also defined in this protocol, meaning even if there were improvements from the previous policy, in this policy, the term vulnerable wasn't described clearly, meaning even if funds have been set aside, they will not achieve their goal of supporting the developing countries. Yeah. So now I'll talk about the current state of adaptation finance. But for the previous things, I think the concepts are so wide. You can go and do some further study because what I've been observing concepts like phase down, phase up, phase out, justice, the climate debt. Those are concepts that developing countries admit in this process of adaptation finance. However, they dodge it by not clearly defining how to be done or who is to benefit, and that's how the process has been slow. But through this process of policy analysis, they keep improving it over time. So now I'm talking about where we are today. It's estimated that the finance needed for developing countries will reach up to 140 billion to 300 billion per year by 2030, meaning the finance needed to support countries to respond to the climate change, and 280 billion to 500 billion per year in 2050. But the sad thing is, even despite all these errors we have gone through, all these COPs have gone through, the majority of climate adaptation finance we receive in African and other developing countries is provided mostly as loans rather than grants, which is not fair because we have observed that they've accepted to pay, but they're not paying because of definitions of concept, refusing to make policies legally binding, things of that nature. So for our colleagues who always access negotiation rooms or who are actively participating in the policy formulation, this can be places to do further study on and see how you can improve this demand of adaptation finance for Africa. And for the in COP26, they talked about 100 billion to start with as the climate finance. And it's sad to know that it's only 24% of that climate finance is allocated to adaptation finance. And if you know what adaptation finance is, it's the finance which will help developing countries avoid avoid or prepare for the forthcoming effects of climate change, as compared to mitigation, which only comes when the crisis has already happened. So I think I'll beg to close my presentation from here. Yeah, thank you very much. And it's time for an open discussion or for questions. So I'll stop my screen sharing.
Thank you so much, Joshua. Goodness, could you kindly take up the session of answering taking note of the questions people have asked in case there is a question, any reaction? Yeah, thanks.
Well, from the chat box, there is no question yet, but we can ask people, connect the audience. If they have any question, then they can raise up their hands. If you have any question, please raise up your hand, then we give you the mic to speak. Thank you. Let me find out if you actually heard all what the speaker presented. If you have any challenge, let's know if you can work on it. Do we all get the speaker? If you didn't actually get everything, you can indicate in the chat box. Or if you have question, you can also write it in the chat box. Thank you.
Hi, I think through you, Isaac, and goodness. I think if you don't have questions at the moment, mine is not a question, rather a thought-provoking statement. That perhaps what we can do as activists is, from this session, is start thinking what adaptation finance means for our respective communities, and just try to do an analysis on how our current policies or national adaptation plans are aligned with adaptation finance, if when the money is made available, are our respective countries in a position to be able to benefit from that? And are our respective communities in a position to benefit from that adaptation finance? So I think that's my thought-provoking statement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tato, for that contribution. We have a question here. Someone is asking, or saying rather, we all know that corruption is the biggest problem. Our countries are facing. So how do we ensure that adaptation finance reaches the people and areas who actually needed it? And then secondly, because finance is mostly handed over to the leaders, but it's so unfortunate that it doesn't reach the respective communities and people. So Joshua, I don't know if you have something to say on that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for that question. That's a wonderful question, and I think it's a common challenge in most African countries. I'll start with, you asked a question of the problem of corruption, and that's a justified problem. The first thing is we have to first advocate for the money to come, for the money to be clearly stated in the policies, and which countries have to pay, and to make all these things legally binding. The next step is Also advocating for this money to come in form of grants rather than coming in form of loans. Because first of all, if they come in form of loans, then also they are embezzled. We'll end up paying back for something we have not used. Then the stage of the money being embezzled by our leaders. In the last COP, I think from COP26, they began bringing so much indigenous people into the negotiation rooms. They bring up youth into the negotiation rooms, and they began policies of investing money directly to community organizations. I think that is something which is working, but has not yet been scaled up to a high level. But I can observe that in most African countries, money is funded to NGOs, to community projects, and the money being given directly through government is reducing. It's still a method being tested, and it has a potential of being scaled up. And that's why we encourage most of the youth who are participating in the climate advocacy to have community projects or to be tied to community NGOs. Because then, if you get opportunities where funding is being channeled into your country rather than through your government, you can also be a direct beneficiary in this kind of, in this policy. Yeah, thank you very much for that question. Hope I answered it clearly.
Thank you, Joshua, for answering that. Tato, is your hand still up, or it's the previous Tato? Okay, I want to add to this. I think I would like to ask the audience a question. We have talked about climate adaptation, and then this is the policy. Can someone say or give us his or her view about climate adaptation policy in their country? Let's get to know if we have idea on that, or maybe if we have come across any document on climate adaptation in our various countries. If you have any response, you raise up your hand, we'll call you. While I'm waiting for that, we have 1 year. Aside from relying on external grants and loans, how can developing countries create sustainable economies that can create adaptation finance by themselves?
Right. Thank you very much for that question, Nisima Akiki. Okay, so first of all, give some light of where we are right now. Right now, most of the African countries are part of the parties which signed to the climate agenda. And in this agenda, there are policies of phasing away from fossil fuels. Most African countries now, to create their own finance, they had opted to devote to investing in fossil fuels, also nuclear energy, among others, to create their own money. But however, by the virtue of the fact that we are part of this conference of parties, and we're in the parties in the UNFCCC, every country has its nationally determined contributions and its endeavors to move into a net zero economy. So by that virtue, most of our countries are being encouraged to phase away from fossil fuels. But this requires finance. That's why we drive ourselves to the need of climate finance, because we do not want to do the same mistakes the developed countries did of developing at the expense of nature. But however, we have still seen several countries which have chosen to defy that, despite the fact that they're under the UNFCCC, and they go on to invest in fossil fuels and get this money. I'll give some examples like Nigeria. They've invested in fossil fuels so much, and they are a strong economy in Africa. But however, we have not seen the tangible effects of this development to the grassroots communities. It's still profiting the few people while putting so many people at a risk. So it is possible for African countries still to invest to go into this pattern. However, we do not encourage it, because we will be repeating the same errors that other countries did, and yet we are advocating for phasing away from fossil fuels. Yeah, thank you. Maybe any other person can supplement on that question.
Thank you, Joshua. Dorcas, your hand is up. You have the floor. Thank you.
Can everyone hear me? Can you
Yes, please
hear
proceed.
me?
Yes, please proceed.
Can you hear me? Okay, so anyway, for me, like when I was doing my research, I found out that right now, many African countries have come up actually with national adaptation policies, and they are working alongside the UN, which is helping them come up with strategic plans to help them implement projects that can help the vulnerable people of Africa. Like, for example, Uganda, I found out that it also has a national adaptation plan already, which is ongoing. And for the case of Uganda, they are mainly targeting agriculture. So they are meant to come up with projects and strategies, let me say, mechanization of agriculture to shift it more from depending on rainfall alone and to make it maybe depend on things like irrigation, and then also empowering farmers with better farming methods to prevent landslides, soil erosion, and all that. So for each national adaptation policy of a country, they look at the country particularly and they see what area they can help. Area that already have the national adaptation policies, and others are still in the process of implementing them. But however, still the biggest challenge is money. If you see even the money which has been funded to do that national adaptation policy for Uganda alone, it's very little. And you can see that little or no work will be made. Maybe awareness will be made, but very little work will be made. So our voices and our knowledge in regards to this will help us go for more funding. That is what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, Dorcas, for that brief. It's very important that we actually know all of this, because it will help us in our daily activism and then what will contribute to our community. Maybe I'll have to call some people to give their own feedback or response from what has been shared this morning here in Nigeria. I know in the Eastern Africa it's afternoon. So maybe I'll call out some people so they can tell us what you have learned so far from this presentation. Caroline Namulema, if you can hear me, please, can you just give us a brief what you've gotten so far from the presentation? Thank you. Okay, so while we're waiting for Caroline to gather herself together, Nicodemus Cooper, can you share with us, please, what you have gotten so far from this presentation? We are coming to you, Ayu. Let's hear from Nicodemus. Okay, Ayo, you can proceed. Thank you.
I wanted to ask a question.
Please go ahead.
I wanted to ask a question to Mr. Joshua. How is this finance related to my community? I come from Karamoja, and then I've never attended COP. It will be my first time. And how best can I prepare? Thank you. That is all.
Okay, Joshua, you've heard the question, right? Thank you.
Yeah, I had that question. Thank you very much, Ayo. So I'll start with how best you can prepare. First of all, in advocacy, I've come to believe that solutions which stem from the grassroots usually have more results as compared to the solution which starts from the top to the bottom. So how you can prepare for COP? At COP, I'll tell you about something called the Indigenous Peoples Pavilion. At this point, you can start looking up for it. Because Indigenous Peoples Pavilion gives a platform for indigenous people like you to present what their communities go through, their challenges, and also talk about the solutions you feel are good for people in your community. The UNFCCC also has a slot for indigenous peoples in these policy making processes. But for now, first, your first COP, you can start by finding out about the Indigenous Peoples Pavilion and how you can, what plans they have for COP, because these things are all over the internet, so that when you go to COP, at least you access them and they add you on board. Because I believe COP is full of indigenous people from Brazil and other parts of South America, yet in Africa, there are so many indigenous people. So I think you can be among the first indigenous people of Africa to be fully recognized in the Indigenous Peoples Pavilion. Then how is this climate adaptation finance related to your community? First of all, you know what can this adaptation finance do to Africa? It helps us prepare for the forthcoming effects of climate change. I'll use an example of a flood. If a flood happens now and people have to recover, they are given mitigation finance. But if people are to build, let me say, dams in preparation for a flood which may occur in future, that's called adaptation finance. So for the case of Karamoja, it's prone to long periods of drought and flash floods. So adaptation finance, what it can do for Karamoja, it can bring about better irrigation mechanisms, dams to solve the problem of flash floods, and also these same dams can help to solve the problem of scarcity of water. So I believe adaptation finance can be of huge impact to your community, but the best way it can help in your community is by you yourself involving yourself in this process and coming up with projects which can be helpful to your community. In that, when you access these international spaces, you also having something to bring on the table, and if money is to be trickled down to your community to offer a solution, you can actively contribute than only being a verbal advocate. Yeah, thank you very much, Ayo, for that question.
Thank you, Joshua, for that response. I believe it's clear, right? Are you?
It's clear.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joshua.
Okay, so we have this response from Abdusalam. He said that I think in Africa, change is to build community resilience, community understanding, community understanding the climate challenge impacts and their contribution towards achieving solutions for building resilience community. I think I'm getting this right. I think in Africa, our big investment of climate change to build community resilience. That is very, very correct, because we have our own peculiarity than the Western countries. So it is very important that we understand the climate change and then see how to bring up solutions in our community. Thank you, Absalom, for that contribution. We have also from Ninsima, and he said, he or she is saying that, as Lucas has given the example of Uganda, which other avenues can we use to access funds to implement these climate adaptation strategies, especially in light of the World Bank suspending financing to Uganda due to the anti-homosexuality bill? How can we implement climate adaptation strategies in such scenarios where other donors who are also against the discriminatory law may follow the World Bank example? So, Joshua, can you respond to that, please? Thank you.
Oh, thank you for that question. Unfortunately, I don't have the expertise to answer that question. Maybe I can pass it on to any other speaker.
Sorry, you say you want to pass it on to who?
Any other person?
Well, I think I have followed up with the event in Uganda, where because of the restriction or because of what the government's stand is on homosexuality. So I think there are other means of accessing funds, but one thing is that as Africa, we should not solely rely on the Western countries for funding, because it seems more like they are controlling our affairs. Take, for instance, now, look at the Arab countries. No matter what is going on, no matter what the Western countries are trying to bring up, they stick to their own rules, and nobody can actually control them or tell them what to do or what to say. So we as Africa, it is very important that we see how to build our country, build our continents, and then see how to make our communities resilient to most of these climate issues that we have. So if we are being restricted to finance for climate adaptation, there are still other means to. Let me not just conclude yet, but I think we can actually invest in our country and then be able to produce what other countries can buy. We have our natural resources. We have things that we can actually produce, and will bring back revenue to our country. Look at UAE now. UAE produces oil. Despite that, we are against fossil fuel companies, but we can look for resources that we can tap into and will be very useful in getting funding to be able to adapt to this climate change. So I don't know if that gives a response to what she is asking. Okay. Isaac, I don't know if that add up to the response there.
Yeah, actually someone has sent a submission in the chat, Samuel Idet. He says Uganda can diversify funding sources by engaging with regional development banks, bilateral partners, climate funds like GCF, Green Climate Fund, and the private sector investments. He continues to say, to implement climate adaptation, despite donor limitations, Uganda can focus on strengthening domestic policies, attracting private sector investments, and fostering partnerships with non-discriminatory donors and organizations to ensure sustainable climate resilience efforts. I 100% agree with Samuel's submission. It carries weight. It's very integral. Thank you so much, Samuel. Goodness, back to you. Back to you in case you...
Okay. Yes, thank you so much. Also, we have this response too from Ninsima. Aside from relying on external grants and loans, how can developing countries create sustainable economies that can create adaptation finance by themselves? I think I have actually responded on that. Samuel also gave a response under that, saying developing countries can foster sustainable economies by promoting local entrepreneurship, investing in renewable energy, advancing agricultural innovation, and enhancing ecotourism. These efforts can generate revenue, create jobs, and contribute to climate resilience, which enables them to generate adaptation finance without relying solely on external funding. Thank you, Samuel Edet, for that response. And then Nisima also is to say, otherwise, thank you so much, Joshua, for this presentation, which has given a simplified understanding of the policy framework, as well as an analysis of previous policies in climate adaptation. Okay, thank you, Samuel. We have seen your response. Hello, you all. That is from Angua. Sorry if I pronounced that wrongly. My name is Romaric Ouadio from Côte d'Ivoire. I am young environmental advocate, passionate about protecting of the environment. I just joined the session, but I have a question. Do you think African countries more affected by climate crisis can enhance resilience of climate change without finance? Joshua, do you have a response to that?
Yeah, I have some response to give, but it's subject to my own opinion. You may not take it as a fact. I've observed a couple of resilience projects and adaptation projects in different parts of Africa, and all of them require money to set up. And they require money to set up. The other projects I say which are set up because of the social corporate responsibility, they're usually on a very small scale and they give minimal impact to the community. The projects which are to offer a meaningful impact to the community require finance to be set up. Thank you. Goodness, back to you, Goodness.
Oh, sorry, my mic was unmuted. Sorry. As Africa, that is from Caroline. As Africa, the easiest way to be sustainable in the climate adaptation is firstly to involve key decision makers of our countries, find a way of inviting them into our talks of climate change. It can at an LC1 leaders, like think lists countries, right? once the leaders get it, it's easy to adopt to the policies that are in place. Thank you, Caroline, for that feedback. Samuel also have this response. African countries facing severe climate impact can enhance resilience. Yes, can enhance resilience by leveraging local knowledge, community engagement, nature-based solutions, and sustainable land management. While finance is crucial, these approaches empower communities to adapt and build resilience in ways that do not solely rely on external climate finance. Then we have this response from Pfizer. Thank you so much for all the contribution coming in. We have this response too from Pfizer also. She is saying that, but of course, in my opinion, yes, we can come up with measures to become more resilient in the face of climate crisis, but we need adequate financing to strengthen resilience and adaptive capacity to enable sustainability, especially here in Africa. Thank you, Pfizer, for that contribution. I think I saw the hand of Nicodemus. Do you still have something to say? And your hand is still up. Do you still have something to say?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. This was just a response to when I was called earlier, to contribute as to what we have learned. And I just wanted to comment on that the engagement was appropriate for all of us, especially the ones that are new in this advocacy, with regards to the basic policy processes, as shared by the presenter, that it is important to note goals which actually lead you to how to avail basic needs to our communities. And that also involves policy formulation, which involves free education. Education is critical. It goes without saying to all our communities in capacitating them about climate change, and all that is attached to that. And it was also the policy adoption that for the policy to be adopted, stakeholders are critical to that engagement. It is important that we convince stakeholders, and this is a very feasible solution to that item. Policy implementation was also mentioned as the next step. I think that is the fourth step that leads to now policy assessment, which needs obviously surveys and researches, and also identifying new problems in our areas. And I think Tato, in her comment was appropriate in that we must now narrow it down to our communities, to community level, in terms of identifying the adaptation finance at community level. I think that was my take home, and hopefully other participants noted as I did. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nicodemus, for that contribution. It shows that we actually followed up on this presentation. Thank you so much. Your hand is still up. Do you have something to say? Or it's the previous, Okay. So thank you so much all for the contribution. We have this information to pass across to everyone on this call. We have our social media handles, Agape Earth Coalition. It's on Twitter, on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and others will follow suit. Please kindly search for them, follow, engage our posts. You get to see more articles there. You learn more from there. And then if you have any questions arising from the previous session and this session, you can write it down. We'll create time for you to ask those questions. Keep on making research, and then keep on uniting with all other activists, all other people who are working underground. And before we close the session, we'd like to take photograph for this photos for this session. So we kindly request that you turn on your cameras so I can see your beautiful and lovely faces. And then we can, so that I can take the photograph for this session. I can see very beautiful and lovely faces in this our session this morning. Wow, these are lovely faces actually. So while I am taking photos from here, Isaac, you can also take from your end so that we can have different views. I can see lovely faces. I'm still waiting for others to turn on their cameras. Sabiela, if you are available to turn on your camera. Absalam, Docas, Paul, Aida. There are others too who are still okay. So at the count of 3, I want us to give us a smiling face. So while doing this, Isaac, please, you can also take from your end. 1, 2, and 3. Okay. So that is the first shot. We are going for the second shot now. Sorry. Okay. So the second shot, 1, 2, and 3. Thank you. So Isaac, let me know if you have gotten the photos from your end as well too.
I'm not a genius in tech, but I don't know whether I took. Let me figure it out.
Okay. Because I want everyone to be on these photos so that we don't miss out anybody. So please, for the last time, we kindly request that you turn on your camera for the last time, please, while we take this. So
Dixon, goodness, I think you can.
Yes, please.
I think you can take both for all the photos because I'm not getting the mechanism here. I am sorry.
It's
I am
okay.
very sorry.
It's fine. It's fine. So for the last time, 1, 2, and 3. Wow, this is very lovely. So guys, thank you so much. Thank you for joining the call again. Okay, Isaac, you have something to say?
Yeah, a big thank you to everyone who has joined in. We have a YouTube channel, Agape Earth Coalition. So for those who probably want to go back and have a recap of the first training, the video was uploaded. It is there, you can access it. But remember still to subscribe on the channel. And also the second video, it will be prepared and also be uploaded on the channel for whoever wants to go back to probably have a check again on the conversation to have an inside feed. But thank you so much for participating. See you again on another training. May God keep you healthy and alive. Bye.
Bye.
Bye,
Thank you, Josh.
everyone.
Thank you, Isaac. Thank you, Goodness.
Thank you, Smeya. Thank you, everyone.